Now it's time to explore Springboot auto configuration in an action, and we'll also see where is Springboot auto configuration implemented. Well, let's head over to Spring Toolsuit ID, and in previous video we have generated a Springboot demo application using Spring Initializer, and we have imported in Spring Toolsuit ID, right? Okay, go to format.xml file and you can see here Springboot starter. Well, this is the dependency that we use to run our Springboot application as a standalone without any server. So now in order to explore Springboot auto configuration in action, what we're going to do is we're going to add Springboot starter web dependency here. Okay, in upcoming videos I will explain you different types of Springboot project that we can create, like a standalone project and a web application or REST API application and a reactive application. So we'll explore different types of Springboot application that we create in upcoming videos. And if you can see here, Springboot starter web dependency. So we use this dependency to create a web application or RESTful application. Okay. Alright, now in order to explore the Spring auto configuration in an action, what I will do, I will go to application.properties file, and here I will add one log level statement, that's logging level dot spring dot spring framework dot web equal to debug. So we are going to see all the debug statement for this package. That's why I have added a debug as a logging level for this package. So we'll see the logging level and all the stuff in upcoming videos. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run our Springboot application, run as Springboot app. So as we have added Springboot starter web dependency in a class path, so Springboot will automatically provide embedded Tomcat server as a default container. So look at here, our Springboot application is up and running in an embedded Tomcat server on port 8080. Alright, and if you can see here, Springboot has auto configured a lot of stuff for us. For example, by default it provides a dispatcher servlet whenever we add this dependency in a class path, and apart from that it will provide embedded Tomcat server. So look at here, embedded Tomcat server, the application is running on port 8080. And apart from that it provides request mapping handler. Okay, it will configure request mapping handler mapping bin for us, and then adapter bin, and it starts the application context. Okay, and lot of stuff, guys. It will configure controller advisor bins, it will enable all these annotations. Alright, it will configure basically a lot of stuff for us. And in order to view whether the dispatcher servlet auto configuration is enabled or not, so for that what I will do, I will change the log statement. For example, go to application.properties file, and here I will just remove .web, and I will just run the application, and let us see whether a dispatcher servlet auto configuration is enabled or not when we add Springboot starter dependency in a class path. Okay, now if you can see here, there are a lot of statements, log statements printed in a console. Okay, now let's explore about the dispatcher servlet. So I am going to just search for dispatch here. Yeah, here we go. So dispatcher servlet auto configuration class matched. Okay, so as we had added Springboot starter web dependency in a class path, so dispatcher servlet auto configuration class should enabled. And look at here the important annotation, add conditional on class annotation. So this annotation is responsible to enable dispatcher servlet auto configuration class. So this basically annotation, what it will do, it will see whether a dispatcher servlet class is available in a class path or not. Okay, so if this annotation finds this class in a class path, then this annotation will basically enable dispatcher servlet auto configuration class. Okay, understood? Just remember this annotation, add conditional on class annotation. So this annotation is basically responsible to enable dispatcher servlet auto configuration class whenever it will find this class, that is dispatcher servlet class, in a class path. So as we have added Springboot starter web dependency in a class path, so this dependency internally uses Spring MVC libraries. For example, let me show you its internal code. So look at here, it internally uses Spring framework provided Spring MVC libraries, Spring Web MVC. Okay, so Spring Boot is just built on top of Spring framework, and it behind the scene uses Spring MVC libraries or Spring framework libraries. Okay, great. Now you can go to Maven dependencies. Here you can see Spring MVC libraries. For example, look at here, Spring Web MVC. This library belongs to Spring MVC framework. And look at here, Spring Web library. Spring Boot internally uses these libraries. So this is a very important. So look at here, Spring Web MVC. So this library contains this class, okay, that is dispatcher servlet class. And add conditional on class is annotation, which is responsible to enable dispatcher servlet auto configuration class whenever it finds this class in a class path. Okay, and as we have seen here, Spring Web MVC is present in a class path and it contains this class. So add conditional on class enabled dispatcher servlet auto configuration. So look at here, matched means this configuration is enabled, that is dispatcher servlet auto configuration is enabled. So apart from that, so look at here, you can see a lot of things. Error MVC auto configuration is matched, it means this auto configuration is enabled. And apart from that, HTTP message converter is also enabled. Okay, by default Spring MVC internally uses Jackson library to convert Java into JSON, JSON into Java object, etc. Alright, so a lot of stuff, guys. So whenever you find matched, it means that the respective auto configuration class is enabled because we have added Spring Boot starter web dependency in a class path. Apart from that, look at here, REST template auto configuration class is enabled. Okay, and web MVC auto configuration is enabled. And negative matches, it means that these are not enabled. Okay, because these classes are not found in a class path, hence these auto configuration classes are not enabled. So as soon as you add dependencies and this class is present in that dependency, then this auto configuration will enable. So did not match means this auto configuration class is not enabled. Whenever you add a Cassandra dependency in a class path, then Cassandra data auto configuration class is enabled. Okay, similarly for Couchbase, similarly for Elasticsearch. So these dependencies we haven't added in a Permlet.xml, hence these dependencies are did not match or did not enabled. Okay, so you can find all these auto configuration classes in one jar file that is called springboot autoconfigure.jar file. Okay, now let us see where is Springboot auto configuration enabled. So this auto configuration enabled in this jar file. So all the auto configuration classes that we have seen, right? So these are all auto configuration classes like validation auto configuration, dispatcher servlet auto configuration, security auto configuration. So these all are Spring Boot auto configuration classes. Okay, EOP auto configuration class, dispatcher servlet auto configuration class. So all these are auto configuration classes, and Spring Boot will enable these auto configuration classes whenever it will find the required dependency, that is required jar file in a class path. Now let's go to Spring Boot auto configure jar file. So this is the single jar file which contains all these auto configuration classes. Okay, so let me show you. So just expand this dependency, and you can see here different different packages. For example, if you go to DAO, you can see this auto configuration class, and if you can go to Couchbase, you can see Couchbase related auto configuration class, and if you can see here JPA, you can see JPA repository auto configuration class. Okay, similarly, if you can go to web, you can see Spring Data Web Auto Configuration class, and if you can go to REST, you can see repository REST properties, etc. So all those Spring Auto Configuration classes are stored under this jar file, and these auto configuration classes are enabled as per the dependency available in a class path, or as per the respective class available in a class path. Under web.servlet package, you can see all these auto configuration classes, and you can see here dispatcher servlet auto configuration class. So whenever Spring Boot finds Spring Boot starter web dependency in a class path, then Spring Boot will automatically configure this auto configuration class. Alright, and you can just go to meta inf here, and you can see spring.factories file. So this file contains basically all the Spring auto configuration classes, spring.factories. Okay, so this file contains all the auto configuration classes, and Spring Boot will basically pick up these classes based on the based on the dependencies present in a class path. So let's search for dispatcher servlet. Okay, so this is dispatcher servlet auto configuration class. Similarly, you can find all the auto configuration classes inside this spring.factories file. Alright, I hope you understood how Spring auto configuration works. Well, Spring Boot will automatically configure Spring based application whenever it will find a dependencies in a class path. So the best example we have seen is dispatcher servlet. Okay, so we have added Spring Boot web starter dependency in a class path. For example, in a pom.xml we have added Spring Boot starter web dependency, right? So once we add this dependency, then we will get dispatcher servlet automatically added in our project. So that is what we have seen here, right? In a console you can see here dispatcher servlet auto configuration matched means this auto configuration is enabled. And who is the responsible to enable this auto configuration? Add conditional on class annotation is responsible to enable this auto configuration whenever it will find this class in a class path. Alright, it's pretty simple. Alright guys, this is how the Spring Boot auto configuration works behind the scene, and this is very, very important. Once you understood how Spring Boot auto configuration works, then it is very easy for you to work with Spring Boot applications. Alright, so going forward we will see how Spring Boot application bootstrap and how the Spring Boot application execution happens. Okay, so in next video we'll see how Spring Boot application execution process starts and how Spring Boot application works behind the scene. Okay, great. I will see you in next video.